When I was about 9 years ancient, I lived with my Linda and little Emily in a small home in a Florida town. The street was mostly safe and kids would ride their bikes outside in the summer. But even back then, there were things that didn't feel right about the home. My Linda used to say it was ancient. And ancient houses make noises. But some of the things I remember from that time didn't echo like home noises. They echo like something else. Something I still don't really know how to explain. The first thing started one dead of night when I couldn't sleep. I was lying in my bed with a blanket pulled up to my chin, staring at the little glow-in-the-silhouette drenched stars on my ceiling. My chamber wasn't very big, just a bed, a dresser, and a toy chest near the window. I remember looking at the shadows on the wall from the trees outside. The branches swayed whenever the wind blew, and I told myself that's what I was seeing. But then I noticed one silhouette wasn't moving like the others. It was in the corner down low, near my toy chest. At first, I brooded. It was a pile of clothes or one of my big stuffed animals. I almost laughed at myself because I brooded I was just being a unnerved kid, but then I blinked. And the silhouette was gone. I remember feeling cold, like the kind of cold that comes from the inside of your body, not the air. I pulled the blanket over my head and fell asleep. The next morning, I didn't even think about it until I glimpsed my toy chest. It was standing open like someone had been looking inside. I never left it open because my Linda would yell if toys spilled out. I closed it and didn't say anything. A few weeks later, my Emily, who was only 5, told my Linda she didn't like the man in the closet. I basically froze when she murmured it because she murmured it so casually, as if it were just a fact. My Linda brushed it off and murmured, "Little kids imagine things." But I glimpsed my Emily's visage and I could tell she wasn't making it up. She murmured he would stand in the closet at dead of night and murmur, but she couldn't hear the words. My Linda talked her in that dead of night and murmured a prayer with her, but she didn't check the closet. Later that dead of night, I woke up because I heard something dragging across my floor, like someone pulling their nails across the wood. I was too unnerved to move, but the echo stopped right by my bed. I was sure if I gazed over the side, I'd see something staring up at me. I just froze there, clutching the blanket until I fell asleep again. The next morning, there were long scratches on the floor, right by the side of my bed. They were fresh, like someone had carved into the wood. I remember running to show my Linda. But she got angry. She murmured I must have been playing with something sharp or dragging furniture. I swore I hadn't. But she didn't believe me. After that, the nights got worse. I would hear faint whispers, almost like a radio on low volume, and it would come from my closet. Sometimes my Emily would cry in her chamber, and when I ran in, she would be pointing at the corner saying, "He's there. He's there." I never glimpsed him, but I believed her. You know when someone's watching you and the hairs on your arms stand up. That's how it sensed. The scariest dead of night was in the middle of summer. I woke up and glimpsed my bedroom. Door was open, even though I always shut it. I could see the hallway light. Because my Linda left one on for us at dead of night. But then as I watched, the light in the hall went out. I brooded maybe the bulb turned out. Then I heard footsteps coming down the hall. They stopped outside my door. I wanted to scream for my Linda, but nothing came out. The door creaked and I glimpsed a tall, silhouette-drenched shape lean in, just its head poking into the chamber. I shut my eyes and pretended to be asleep. When I opened them again, the door was closed and I was alone. In the morning, I whispered my Linda if she had come into my chamber. She murmured no. She had been asleep all dead of night. My Emily murmured. She glimpsed the man again standing by her bed. We told my Linda together, and she finally gazed worried. She lit a candle and murmured a prayer in each chamber of the home. Things were quiet for a little while after that, but it didn't last. One afternoon, I came home from school. Before my Linda, I was sitting on the couch doing homework when I heard the echo of the toy chest in my chamber slammed shut. The thing is, nobody else was home. I hoped it was just the wind. But when I walked down the hall, I glimpsed my bedroom door was wide open. My toy chest was closed, but all my toys were scattered on the floor like someone had dumped them out. I backed away and waited outside until my Linda came home. When I told her, she still didn't believe me and murmured the cat knocked things over. Years later, after we moved out, I whispered my Linda if she ever experienced anything in that home. She hesitated, then murmured yes. She murmured. Sometimes she would wake up and see a silhouette standing in her doorway. She murmured. She never told us because she didn't want to scare us, but she admitted she believed there was something wrong with that home. She murmured she brooded it was a man, someone who used to live there. She never murmured much more, but I know what I glimpsed, and I know what my Emily glimpsed, too. Even now as an adult, when I think about that time, I feel sick in my stomach. It wasn't imagination. It was something real, and it wanted us to know. It was there. Sometimes late at dead of night. When I can't sleep, I still hear the echo of nails dragging across the floor. When I was 10 years ancient, my family moved into a bigger home because my Linda had just gotten remarried and we needed more space. The home was nice, newer than the one we lived in before, and it was in a quiet Florida suburb with a lot of trees. I brooded I would be happy there. At first, everything seemed normal, but then little things started happening that made me feel like the home wasn't right. My bedroom was at the end of the hall. It had two big windows that visage the Florida yard and a closet that was deeper than the one I had before. I liked it until the first dead of night I slept there. I woke up around midnight because I heard something moving in the closet. It wasn't loud, just soft shuffling like clothes being brushed against. I stared at the closet and told myself it was just the home settling. I know it sounds cliché, but most people, even as children, would assume small sounds coming from here and there in a home are just typical home noises that you hear every day. But then I glimpsed the door move. It didn't swing open, but it shivered like someone had lightly pressed on it from the inside. I wanted to run to my Linda's chamber, but I was frozen. I stayed that way until I fell back asleep, still staring at the closet. The next morning, the closet door was cracked open just a little. Even though I had shut it tight. I whispered my Linda if she had gone in there, and she murmured no. She murmured maybe the air vents pushed it, but I knew it wasn't the air vents. The nights after that got worse. I started hearing tapping on the window glass. At first, I brooded it was tree branches, but when I gazed, there were no branches near the window. The tapping would go on for minutes, and when I pulled the blanket over my head, it would stop. I tried to ignore it until one dead of night I finally peeked out. I glimpsed a pale hand pressed against the window. It was on the outside, but the window was on the second floor, way too high for anyone to reach without a ladder. The hand stayed there for a long time, just pressed without moving. Then it slid down slowly and disappeared. I didn't sleep at all that dead of night. I told my Linda, and she started cracking up laughing. When I told her, she didn't believe me. For a second. When she glimpsed that I wasn't just saying it as a prank or a joke, she leaned more into trying to convince me that I was probably in a half-asleep state and seeing things from my dream. But I knew that was a load of horseshit. My Robert didn't believe me either. He murmured I was making it up for attention. And he also got a laugh out of it. But I started noticing he kept the hallway light on at dead of night. So maybe he didn't feel as safe as he pretended. A month later, my little Daniel, who was 4, started talking about the white lady. He would say she came into his chamber and sat on his bed. My Linda brooded it was just his imagination. But one dead of night, I heard him screaming. I ran in and glimpsed him curled up under his blanket crying. When he finally calmed down, he murmured the white lady had been standing by his door, just staring at him. He murmured her eyes were all black. I believed him. Because of what I had seen at my window. I started sleeping with the blanket over my head every dead of night. But that didn't stop the dreams. I began to dream of the white lady, too. She would stand in the corner of my chamber and murmur my name. Her voice was dry, like leaves rubbing together. Sometimes I would wake up and still hear it, faint, but definitely real. One dead of night, I woke up and glimpsed her standing at the foot of my bed. She was taller than anyone I had ever seen. Her head almost touched the ceiling. She wore a long white dress that moved even though the air was still. Her hair was black and stringy, and her visage was pale like chalk. Her eyes were like empty black holes. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I shut my eyes, and when I opened them again, she was gone. But my closet door was wide open. After that, I couldn't go in my closet anymore. I begged my Linda to let me sleep in her chamber, but she murmured I need to learn how to be brave. I think she didn't want to admit she was unnerved. 2. The worst dead of night came during a storm. Heavy rain and loud wind. I woke up to the echo of my window creaking. When I gazed, the window was slowly sliding open. Even though it was locked, I could see the lock turning by itself. The window opened all the way and I glimpsed the white lady climb in. She didn't move like a person. She floated. Her feet never touched the floor. She drifted toward my bed and leaned down until her visage was right in front of mine. I sensed her cold breath on my skin. She whispered my name again, and this time I screamed as loud as I could. My Linda and Robert came running in, but when they turned on the light, the window was closed and locked, and no one else was there. They yelled at me for scaring everyone, but I could see in their faces that they were worried. The weird thing about that part of the story is that I don't vividly remember what happened between the moment I glimpsed that lady floating towards me and my screaming. The best I can explain it is that I sort of blacked out for a moment before remembering screaming and having my parents rush into the chamber. My window was closed again, which would suggest to people that it was just a dead of night terror. That's what my parents believed it was. I think my Linda started taking me to therapy for a while because they were worried about me. We lived in that home for 3 more years and I never got used to it. My Daniel stopped talking about the white lady, but I think it was because he was too unnerved, not because she stopped visiting. Sometimes I would hear him crying at dead of night and saying, "Go away." I think he just also didn't want to be forced into going to therapy. Sometimes when it storms at dead of night, I still get unnerved to even get up to go to the bathroom or get water. I'll glance over at corners of the chamber, making sure I don't see something tall lurking there. It goes to show how these kinds of things stick with you into adulthood. I'd be more open to believing it was simply dead of night terrors if it weren't for the fact that I glimpsed that hand on my window before my little Daniel even first mentioned the white lady. I guess this is just one of those freakish experiences that cannot be explained. When I was 8, I rode my bike every day after school. I lived on a quiet street with small houses and big trees. I learned every crack in the sidewalk. I learned where the mailman stopped. One home I liked was down the block. I had to ride near the corner of the block to get a view of the yard. There was a long driveway and a wide lawn. An older man stood in that driveway most afternoons. He'd always wear a hat and he'd stand where the driveway met the sidewalk and look down the street. When I rode by, he would say hi. He never came onto the sidewalk. He never stepped off his driveway. He would call out and wave and then go back to watching his yard. I always waved back. My mother told me to never cross the street by myself, so I never crossed to actually speak to the man visage to visage. And the man knew that. He would call to me from his place and ask about school. He would ask about my bike. He whispered if I liked the bell on my new red bike. I even remember once he told me a joke about a cat that made me laugh. We talked for weeks like that. The conversations were short. They were always from his driveway to the curb. He seemed to know small things about me without me saying them. For example, the fact that I had a little Daniel or my dad got a new car. I never told him these things. I brooded maybe he had seen us from down the block or something, like he was just a neighbor who watched the street. One day, I got a brand new bike. It was red with a shiny bell like I mentioned before. I rode down the block slow and he called out, "Nice bike." He whispered if I wanted to race to the corner. I told him no, because my Linda would be angry. He smiled and murmured, "One day." After that, we talked about small things. He told me about a bird that liked his fence and then about a rule about never stepping on a certain stone. Then he told me a story about a dog that would always bring a slipper back. He sounded like someone who had time to watch small things. I started looking for him when I was on my bike. Some afternoons he was there and sometimes he wasn't. Then one week he stopped coming out. I rode down the block past the home and no one stood there. The curtains in the front window were closed. I slowed down and gazed at the driveway and it was kind of weird not seeing the man there. I wanted to ask my mother if I could cross the street. She murmured no. She murmured the road was not for unsupervised kids. Anyway, a few days later, I glimpsed a woman in the Florida yard of that home. I had never seen anyone in that yard before. I had to ride around the corner to see her. She had her hair tied back and she held a watering can, so I had to assume she was watering flowers back there. I stopped my bike down the street so she would not see me too close. I wanted to call across the road like I always did. But I didn't. I don't know if I was too shy or unnerved of what my mother would say if I were staying out too late. The woman didn't seem to notice me anymore. Then I noticed her, though. A few days later, I rode by again, and the woman was on the back porch. She had a mug in her hands. I sat on my bike and watched for a bit. Then she opened a small side door and went around the home. I pedaled slowly to the corner and waited where the sidewalk curved. I gazed down the block just to ensure my Linda wasn't outside. Then I decided I would quickly cross the street. I pushed my pedals and crossed like my life depended on it. The home gazed bigger from up close. The driveway was long and sloped down to the road. I sensed like I was not allowed to be there. I stopped at the end of the driveway near the back gate. The woman heard me. She turned and glimpsed a small boy with a red bike standing at the gate. She gazed surprised but not angry. She came to the gate and opened it and she whispered what I was doing back there. I told her about the man on the driveway, and that he would use to say hi when I would bike past. I told her he knew my name and that he murmured he would race me one day. She wiped her hands on her dress like she had been working in then. Murmured the man I described sounded like her husband. I smiled thinking she would say he went on a trip or he's inside and she'll go get him, but she didn't smile. She murmured he had died the year before. She murmured he died in his chair. His name was Victor. I sensed a cold space open in my chest. I whispered her if she had a picture. I wanted to see him. She went inside and returned with a small frame. The photograph showed a man with the same hat and the same broad smile. He actually bore a resemblance to the man I'd always seen. Then the woman murmured the photo was new, taken only a couple of years ago. She murmured her husband had a scar across his cheek since he was young. I gazed at the photo close and the man in the picture had a thin, pale scar from ear to mouth. I remembered the man on the driveway. He had no scar. He had a round plain visage and smooth skin. The hat matched and the smile matched. But the scar did not. I told her I once glimpsed a mark on the man's visage, but I brooded he rubbed his cheek once. She murmured that that scar had been there for a long time, but that he'd hide it under stubble sometimes. She murmured again that her husband had died and that no one else lived in the home. She murmured she had moved back last summer to take care of the garden and that she's never seen or heard anyone standing in the driveway. I honestly started to get kind of unnerved at this point. I thanked her and backed down the driveway. I didn't look back into the yard again. I rode home slow and put the bike in the garage. The bike ride back was kind of like how when you almost get into a car accident, you'll drive home the rest of the way in silence with the radio off. My Linda didn't ask any questions when I got home. She just told me to be careful. That dead of night, I couldn't sleep. I brooded about the man with the hat. I brooded about his laugh and the way he murmured my name. And I brooded about the scar in the photograph. The next day, I went by the home and the curtains were open. Sunlight touched the porch and driveway, but no one stood in the driveway. I waved from the corner, but no one waved back, so I pedaled away. For a while, nothing else happened. I tried to forget. I made new routes on my bike. I talked with kids on other blocks. Weeks passed. Then one dead of night, I woke up and heard my name. It sounded like someone outside the home, near my window. The voice was familiar. It murmured my name like the man across the street used to say it. I sat up fast and my head started spinning. Over the light echo of raindrops outside. I knew for a fact I was hearing my name being repeatedly called. I shouted for my mother and then threw the covers over myself, hiding. She came in a hurry and sat by the bed. I told her about the voice outside my window. She rubbed my back and told me it was the wind. To make me feel better, she went to the window and lifted the blinds. She murmured. There wasn't anyone out there, so I went over to check myself. There was a light. Rain outside, but other than that, my Linda was right. My father got up and checked the locks to the windows and doors. He gazed outside with a flashlight, which made me feel better. They murmured there was no one out there. When I insisted I heard a voice, they murmured perhaps the most typical thing a parent would say to an unnerved child, that I dreamed it. The next morning, my throat hurt from shouting the dead of night. Before I told my friends at school, and they laughed at me for implying I believed in ghosts. One friend dared me to stand in the driveway of that home at dead of night and call his name. I did not take that dare. Days passed and nothing happened, so I moved on. The years went on and the street changed. Houses sold. And the woman's home stood empty for a little while. I once glimpsed movers taking boxes out. Later on, new people were painting the front. The long driveway was still there, but it had new cars. I rode past and did not look for a man in a hat. I got older. I learned other routes. I learned the names of new neighbors and their dogs. And eventually, at the age of 18, I moved out for college. I never moved back to that home because my parents sold it while I was in college. But the memory of that man sits like a small stone in my chest. I wonder why I didn't ask the woman for more pictures or go back to press her for more details. I guess in that moment I was unnerved to wonder if I'd been talking to a ghost. I didn't cross that street again for a long time. I told the story to one or two people later in life, and they even whispered why I didn't go back and ask that woman more. Or why I didn't tell the woman everything I remembered. Maybe they were right. Maybe I should have been braver. Maybe I should have whispered more questions about the scar or to see a wedding photo, but I was 8. I wasn't really thinking that way. A few years ago, I drove down the block just for the hell of it. A child was riding a bike near the corner. The driveway was empty. For a moment, I wanted to stop. I wanted to ask if anyone had stood there and murmured, "Hi." I wanted to know if anyone else had heard a voice in the rain. I wanted a small answer that would close the gap. But I didn't stop. I just kept driving. The memory stays as it was, and I try my best to suppress it these days. Really scary stories, every day. Subscribe, like if you like, turn on the bell so you don't miss new videos.